Welcome to Recogs, the show where we learn how the world's best business operators build consumer brands from sourcing to selling. Brought to you by Manufactured. Manufactured is an online platform that helps brands manufacture, finance, and distribute inventory across 20 industries and 25 countries. If you're interested in learning more, check out manufactured.com. Our guest today is Hugh Thomas, co-founder and former CEO of Ugly Drinks. Ugly Drinks was a sparkling water brand that has great tasting flavors. He is now the CEO of YouTuber jacksepticeye's coffee brand called Top of the Mornin. We discuss how he scaled and grew Ugly over a few years, what impacted his margins during the pandemic and ultimately led him to shut down the business, and how he met Jacksepticeye, what it's like working with a YouTuber, and how he's building Top of the Mornin coffee. Without further ado, here's Hugh. Hugh, thank you so much for joining me here today. How are you?
Nice to see you, Mike. Yeah, I'm good, thank you. How about you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for joining me here on Recogs. Always great to just kind of catch up with you just through the years. I feel like I've known you. I mean, we've known each other for like 2-3 years, but it just feels like a lot longer.
We're a blossoming COVID, a virtual friendship initially, right? And we catch up often, but yeah, we're good friends.
Yeah, I feel like we're good friends, but I feel like it's always been kind of a virtual.
I think because of the pandemic, I think limited opportunities, but yeah, it's always good to chat.
I don't think we've ever met in person, so we'll have to change that at some point. Talk to me a little bit about Ugly Drinks. First of all, what was like the aha moment that led to Ugly? And then how did you also approach Ugly from like an operations perspective?
Yeah, so for a bit of context is Ugly was a flavored sparkling water business I started back in 2013, had the initial idea, 2012, 2013. So I was 21 or 22 in my bedroom in London in the UK when I had that idea with my friend Joe. And we really didn't know what we were doing. We did have a little bit of beverage experience working at Vita Coco, the coconut water company, but at 21, 22, I think you have a lot more than you actually do. And we really wanted to build a business that could take on soda and sugary soda and diet soda in a way that removed sugar and sweeteners and chemicals from the product and created a flavored sparkling water company that was designed to make drinking water fun. And so, we started really with not a clue what we were doing, never raised money, never sourced a co-manufacturer. And by the end of that business, and the business, success is a weird thing, right? I mean, at certain points, we ran that business for 8 years. At certain points we were in multiple thousand stores, multiple markets, multiple countries, selling in probably 10, 15 countries, offices, UK, US, probably sold, 4 or 5 million cans of product in that period of time, maybe more. But ultimately, had some really difficult operational unit economic challenges during the coronavirus pandemic period that really squeezed the business and ultimately left to us, as founders leaving the business and again, kind of it not relatively working out on the grand scheme of selling a company for lots of money. So yeah, that's kind of how it all came to go. A bit of a brief summary.
During the pandemic, what were some of the operational challenges they had to go through? Was it increases in terms of raw materials? Was it also, I'd imagine too, was also shipping, but we'd love to kind of learn more a little bit about some of the challenges that ultimately led to the outcome.
Yeah, so obviously the world's changed a lot since we started Ugly. In the UK alone, during the period we started that business, we had Brexit, where the UK voted to leave the EU. We had multiple political changes. We had change of president in the US. So the business was always, what I learned quite quickly is that there's a lot of things outside of your control. And so when we started the business, we wanted to start a beverage company. That's what we loved and started with. And we wanted to build something that could hit as many consumers as possible. So we always started, maybe naively, maybe just stubbornly, with wanting to have an affordable price point for the consumer. And so that was always a goal and dream of the business. And so you kind of reverse engineering from a cheap price point. And then we wanted a simple supply chain that could scale anywhere. So we thought water, flavors, carbonation, and cans put into cardboard boxes or trays should be pretty simple, right? Famous last words. But obviously when you're selling an 8-pack of seltzer for $3.99 at retail in CVS, the cost you're making that for is pretty cheap as well, and the margins are very thin. So, once we were selling in about 5,000-6,000 stores again, we probably start to really realize kind of the pressure of those margins. And certainly when macro factors hit you, that's when I think I underestimated. You always read about having healthy margins and having margins, but when coronavirus hit, obviously, certainly in the US, we obviously weren't drinking in bars or restaurants, so liquids were being consumed at home, which meant at-home consumption of products in cans rose, and out-of-home consumption of products, like beer wasn't being sold on draft in the same volumes. Or you had the hard seltzer explosion at a similar time as well. So aluminium, as I say, or aluminum, depending where you grow up, was in high demand, and as a small startup, we didn't necessarily have the best access to it, which meant that for many startups, you either had to wrap stainless steel, like kind of plain cans with labels, which is an expensive process to do, or you had to buy cans from other markets, other countries, and ship them to the US, or short your customers. They're really the three options. None of those three options helped us with margins. And when you're selling a flavored sparkling water that is not too differentiated, I guess, in ingredients from Waterloo Sparkling, LaCroix, Bubbly, Aha, etc., it's not like you can increase the price. You can't go to CVS and say, we're putting a price increase through as a small startup. And so ultimately, when the price of aluminium and the price of shipping went up, our margins got squeezed. And so the learning for me there, and for anyone listening, is to really think at the beginning about your pricing and your margins with not only that hat on of kind of what's happening right now and where's the market at right now, but also those macroeconomic shocks. If there's a 20% increase in one of your commodity costs, what happens to your margin? None of us expected COVID to happen, but I mean, again, even since coronavirus, and we've had macroeconomic shocks when it comes to things like war in the Ukraine, which has impacted inflation. We've had economic factors in terms of inflation in most markets right now. So as a startup, it's harder to put prices through versus, say, Coke or Pepsi. And so hopefully it makes sense what I'm saying, but yeah, these were kind of some of the challenges we faced as coronavirus happened.
I really also just appreciate your honesty and just saying how it happened with the ugly story and ugly drinks. I really found it interesting about how you said with aluminum cans, which I didn't think about, that because because everyone's drinking from home, then you have that pressure of, okay, we need to produce then a lot more cans rather than in the beer, alcohol, spirits business, than actually produce barrels or kegs or what have you.
And obviously the factories can't just turn on doubling their volume overnight. And I know US, now at this moment in time, the price of aluminium is back down towards a price similar. Still, I think there's still general inflation across the market, but nothing like, you're talking like 50 to 100% inflation on can pricing at that time. And you can see the spikes in certain graphs. And then we started to have to buy in cans from different markets. And obviously then we were paying for shipping costs into the US. And obviously the other macro factor there was that everybody was importing stuff into America at that time. Furniture, everybody was at home spending money on their houses. So you had a lot of furniture coming in from China or Asia or Europe or wherever the cans were coming from. So the ports were full. And the shipping costs of shipping containers went up too. So people can read about this online, but obviously when you start shipping those containers across the Pacific or the Atlantic, and then they're stuck in a port, it's very different to kind of putting your canning plant an hour away from where you're making the cans, which is what we previously had. And then you end up spending that money shipping containers from ports to the middle of the country, right? Which was also expensive at that time. So it was like a double whammy.
Yeah, and I'd imagine also what also put pressure when it came to on the supply chain side too when it comes to shipping is because everyone's at home, you're doing kind of single box orders too, rather than shipping in pallets, right? Shipping in pallets to retail stores and what have you. You're doing that at much greater volume than maybe you did than of course you did ever before with that e-commerce, and so that's going to take a huge toll because it's a lot more effort to ship single box orders to individual households rather than one pallet right to a retailer.
Yeah, all of those things. Even shipping the pallets to retailers got more expensive too. Certainly is, and some of the cans we had to bring into the US had to be produced in different factories because the factory we were working with couldn't use the cans we could get our hands on. So you end up moving,
Oh, really?
say,
Just for quality reasons?
just like machinery, like machine A works with can manufacturer B, and that's why it's there. And then if you bring in, you either have cans or no cans as a canned drinks company. Having no cans is really the worst place to be. So we were like, we'll get these cans, ship them in, and then this factory can't use them. So then you have to find another co-packer, and that co-packer could be 4 or 5 states in a different direction, which you then have to move materials, everything from A to B. So yeah, I mean, and even within the US, domestic shipping prices went up too. Truck drivers didn't want to drive as far away from home. There was obviously labor shortages because people were sick. So there was multitude of factors at play in terms of changing the macroeconomics. And I go back to the first point is that we didn't have, because of the pricing and the type of product I was going after, we didn't have the buffer to soak up the change in costs. Unless you raise $50, $100 million, it was very hard to soak it up.
Breaking down the unit cost of what it produced to produce one can of Ugly, what was the percentage when it came to the aluminum can?
Yeah, so I mean, we saw inflation on every part of the supply chain too. I mean, there were even at some points, like there were carbon dioxide shortages as well, because a lot of CO2 is made in different markets, and there were challenges with that side of things as well. So we end up with this very simple product that we thought, but obviously navigating some serious challenges. Price of cardboard went up, price of logistics went up, the tolling fees with factories went up because they were understaffed. So supply and demand obviously drove those factors. But I'd say cans went from about 20% of the product cost probably towards like 40, 50% of the product cost during that period of time. So it was that big an impact on the costs. And as I said, the alternative, we were bringing in, the alternative was to buy silver cans and wrap them, but that would have been, even more expensive. And I think if you think of a price of a can of Ugly, $3.99 for an 8-pack, we're talking like, single in a multi-pack format, like 50 cents retail price for a can. But obviously, other products, maybe the prebiotic soda space, or they were talking $2.99 retailer cans. So there's a little bit more flex in terms of soaking it up. Additionally, 16-ounce cans, products, like a liquid death size can, had very similar price point, a cost point, but higher price point per fluid ounce, obviously in retail. So slightly different margin profile too. But obviously when you're selling 8-packs and you're making them and you have them in 6,000-7,000 retailers, it's very hard to say we're not making 12-ounce 8-packs at the moment. So there are certain decisions you make pre-COVID that impact you down the line.
No, yeah, I mean that makes a lot of sense just in terms of like the margin squeeze, and also it's really tough when you launch and you come in at a particular price point. You say this is the price. I know that you were really thinking about making this drink accessible and this brand accessible, but it's really hard to change your pricing and to increase your pricing. It's easy to lower. Everyone loves discounts, but it's really tough to raise once you're already in market.
Yeah, I mean, decisions we made on Ugly when we were in my flat in London when we were 21, 22, played out 8 years later during COVID in terms of how you built the business, the structure, the supply chain, the formulations, the price point. And as I say, at that certain point, you need to raise a lot of money to survive. And we weren't able to do so. We weren't, you're not talking like putting another 5 million in. You're talking putting another, $25-50 million of investment needed at that point to scale and grow a business and to soak up those macroeconomic impacts, which, is a lot of money, for anyone, let alone a small startup. So, lots of learnings, as you say. Like once you're, and what we never had with the product was demand issues. We always sold everything we made. We had lots of loving consumers, lots of consumers who loved it, and knowing what I know now, when I approach new businesses now, I definitely think about economics at the beginning as well. I'm not pessimistic. I'm just realistic versus optimistic now, and where things can go to. So yeah, it's that's kind of part of that process, and I think as you say there, Mike, obviously when many startups launch, they start with kind of certainly in beverage, there'll be premium, natural, healthy products that as they scale reduce their price. Whereas the strategy we took was disrupt the market, come in with a brand that's fun, that fun price point that consumers can access, which was ultimately proved not resistant to macroeconomic shocks, essentially.
Yeah, and I do think it's, well, I love to hear your thoughts on this too. I feel like when you're starting out, it's so great to you're just trying to, get demand, right? You're trying to people to stop and to buy or consume or to try and to really love your product. And you might think, okay, let's figure out the economics maybe a little bit later. And the reason why is because once you get at scale, once you're then selling, hundreds of thousands, millions of cans or whatever, we're going to be at scale where we're going to be able to actually bring down our costs, where it actually makes sense, and this is going to be, a very viable business and a real business kind of moving forward. But at the beginning, let's just get it into customers' hands, and I think that that can be really tough, because it's also tough to predict how at scale how much those costs will go down, and then you throw in the wrench, which of course is COVID, the global supply chain crunch, and that's really difficult to cope.
No, and I think so over the last 10 years of me working, running my own businesses, the number of macroeconomic shocks doesn't seem to stop. Right? It's almost like nowadays we have to plan for those things. I mean, it's almost on a quarterly basis at this point. There's some sort of shock, and I agree in the business models, when you sit there with a clean piece of paper at the beginning, when you're going out to raise that initial financing, you have those savings built in, economies of scale, as people call them, right? But obviously for us, when we hit scale, we had the wrench thrown in, and so costs went up at scale. So it was like the double whammy, right? We weren't small, so we're talking kind of multiple zeros on those costs in terms of how they impact your bottom line. Which we really ran super lean. We went super lean as a business. We started building demand with really clever things like limited editions to stimulate demand, and product was selling. But ultimately, if you're not making enough margin, it's very hard to cover the costs of running any business. Which just squeezed the pressure massively.
Were you using mostly, in terms of actually financing the inventory during Ugly? Were you using mostly? Was it mostly cash or equity dollars that were raised, or were you also exploring a inventory financing?
A combination. We've used in different markets. We used both, and it certainly, depending on the retailers too, we could get some factor invoicing on that front, and we did have as well co-manufacturers on different payment terms as well, which almost acts like with friendly payment terms, 90 to 120 day payment terms, almost acts like that facility. And then we've also raised capital, and we also experimented with some of those different kind of working capital loan providers as well on certain activities and production runs, I'd say. trying to keep it very brief without boring everyone to tears. But obviously, the economics need to work. You need to have the margins almost to get that cash cycle working. Whereas if you're kind of just kicking the can down the road, then it's almost not that advantageous to a business. So certainly, as those margins got squeezed, some of those facilities almost lost their value in some way. Or there's still value there, but it's not exactly helping your cash cycles. It's really just delaying the inevitable at a certain point. So yeah, that's roughly how we did it.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. So I know you left Ugly eventually. Unfortunately, Ugly to shut down. What led you to becoming the CEO of Top of the Morning? And tell us a little bit more about Top of the Morning.
Yeah, so I mean, Ugly came for me personally came to a natural point where I just couldn't take it any further. I felt like I'd tried everything in that business, and part of that, was an amazing learning process, and I took some time out to really reflect on what I'd learned and what I wanted to do next. And I just have a burning desire for consumer products, and I love the space. And I felt, I actually feel having the tough experience we just spoke about for the last 10, 20 minutes, which I don't speak about that often, so it's quite interesting to kind of revisit it. But it's something I spent a lot of time looking at. And it wasn't just like, I think it's very easy to lean into the things that didn't go well, but also spend a lot of time looking at what did go well. And I think with a lot of startups and a lot of businesses, even the in quotes success stories where a company sells, there's a huge amount of luck at play. There's bad luck and good luck, and that's just life sometimes. But there are certain things I learned that I wanted to codify. So I spent a good amount of time kind of almost writing these things down and codifying them and making my notes and almost rebuilding a thesis for what I thought a modern consumer brand needed to be. And so I spent time, exploring, meeting people. I hadn't had time to meet people for years, so I spent that time reconnecting, and then was connected to the YouTuber Jacksepticeye. And Sean, his name is one of the world's biggest YouTubers, 30 million YouTube subscribers, multiple tens of millions of followers across his social media platforms. And he had the trademark and the IP for Top of the Morning, being Irish, and a coffee company that was in the early stages, and was looking for a leader to take the business forwards. And I met Sean and immediately engaged with him. And one of the things, again, talking about the model here, it's like, okay, what does the supply chain and the margins look like? And coffee has good margins, and a well-trodden supply chain, and a product that people love, drink every day, and actively subscribe to, because if you don't have your morning coffee, it's a pretty rough day. And on top of that, we had the marketing channel of somebody with 30 million engaged subscribers who couldn't post about the brand because it's his brand. And so we don't have to pay him to post about it. And so, when you hear about the Ugly journey where we've been spending money on marketing and you've got tight margins, and then you flip it and look at this space, it felt really interested, and I got on with him really well. I loved his vision for something that was positive. We decided we wanted to give back to teenage mental health as well as part of building the brand, and just build this brand that was full of soul and happiness. And so for me, that was super interesting to me. And then I basically got under the hood and started finding out what was going on, and that's when we started working together.
So was it Jacksepticeye, in terms of coffee? He already knew that he wanted to make a coffee brand at that point. Like, how far along was it, and also how did you think? Because I know that you talk a little bit in the Ugly about when you thought about Ugly, and it was a really looked like an awesome brand. Like, I also thought it was delicious. You sent me way too much product. I mean, actually, like the right amount of product, or maybe not enough product, because I crushed those cans so in only like a few days. But how also did you think, okay, cool, we're doing coffee, but how do we make sure that it's a differentiated product? 'Cause I remember you saying how you felt in terms of the Ugly side this wasn't actually as, the more you kind of unraveled, and maybe when COVID and the pandemic happened, you realize that this is kind of more of like a more like simple, or like a commodity type of more type product.
Yeah, so the way I looked at it was, again, there's like, again, it's look at this as like fourth wave coffee is how I approach the space, and I'm a big coffee fan and coffee drinker, as is Sean. And when he'd looked at it, he'd gone, first wave coffee was, I think, just before or during the First or Second World War, where people started drinking instant coffee for the first time. And some of the big brands that we all know, like Folgers and things like that came through. The second wave is when Italian coffee concepts were brought to the US. So you had the Americano and espresso brought over by companies like Starbucks to the US. Third wave is when that was elevated. So you had the craft coffee movement with brands like Stumptown, Blue Bottle, et al. And then from my point of view, it was like, how do you take that elevated coffee experience to a new consumer and make it and democratize it? Very similar to Ugly, I believe in taking great experiences and healthy products to as many people as possible, and not just leaving great stuff to hipsters or wealthy people. And so Sean had this idea of kind of, a lot of his fans and his audience were almost like growing into adulthood and having those adult experiences for the first time, whether it's drinking coffee or other, some of the other beverages we have as well. And so we wanted to build a brand that almost demystified and simplified that kind of craft coffee experience. So when you open our box, it says, "You're the barista now." And it's very much about, taking all that lingo and all the fluff from the third wave and simplifying it. So it's premium craft coffee, super well sourced, as good as any coffee, a premium coffee on the market. And then we've hopefully wrapped and packaged it in a way that if you're not into the snooty world of coffee, that you can feel it, like you can approach it and look at it and feel part of the world and just feel uplifted by it. And so I think that's where the premise came from. And then as we build this, it's a platform. So Top of the Morning is a platform for those morning coffee and beverage experiences. We have teas, we have other products coming. But we wanted to keep it with real soul as well, which is why we decided to donate to charity. But also, it's Sean's brand. This isn't a big corporation. We're able to do things nimbly. We're able to make our own decisions creatively and really make sure that it stays true to his values. And Sean has really clear set of values that he wants to put out there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I really appreciate in sharing you also sharing some of those initiatives that you're a part of. How, in terms of like sourcing premium coffee, and I also love it. It seems like you're making coffee, maybe not from like a price point perspective, or maybe from a price point perspective, but in terms of just more inclusive or like accessible, just in terms of like the branding and also how you approach it. But how did you also think about like sourcing like the premium coffee beans?
Yeah, so we decided to work with a partner on that, and a team who have that real expertise, and we really work closely with them to make sure that certainly when I joined, we also changed the packaging we were working with too to be environmentally friendly and recyclable. So we went through every touch point. Where does the coffee come from? Where's it grown? How are the farmers treated? Are we off? What's the carbon footprint? What's the packaging looking like? And we have roadmaps on all of these things to just continue improving them the whole time as well. Top of the Morning had a partner, but we looked at what was available, decided that the partner we were working with was the best, and then decided to really refine what we were offering. And we're just at the beginning. We've learned, as you heard at the beginning, I've learned a lot of lessons around pricing. We're going at the right pace. We're building things methodically. We're not rushing. Products that we're launching are well thought through and well sourced. And I think we have a more premium price point right now and quite specific channel focus, direct to consumer only, but it's all very deliberate and all very thought through in terms of us building solid foundations for a business and building our community and building the brand that means one day we can scale that into other channels, but also change that pricing mix as well.
Yeah, no, I love how that you're very focused on, D2C first, which makes a lot of sense since of course Sean has, a big YouTube audience, so it makes sense for you to start, D2C. What I always find is tricky when it comes from like a sales or just obviously I'm an observer. You know way more than I do on any of this stuff. But um but what I think is kind of interesting when I think about when you have a talent that are starting their own consumer brands is I think it's really hard, especially in CPG, when of course you have talent that's that's big on YouTube, for example, just like Sean, to theoretically drive sales to retail stores and to retail and to brick and mortar. Make I would imagine driving sales to D2C channel is obviously nothing seamless, but it's maybe a lot more easy to convert in terms of people that follow and like Sean's stuff to become a coffee drinker. But how are you? I know that right now you're exclusively focused on D2C, but since 80% of CPG is of the sales are going to be in retail, how are you thinking as well from like a retail channel perspective in the future and when the timing actually is right to actually go there?
It's a timing question, Mike, and I think there's inherent risks involved in that channel if you have a big creator behind you. What There's a couple of things that I would say I'm thinking through, and you have to be apprehensive about with a creator-led brand. From my point of view, this is just my opinion and my take on it. If you're able to launch into those stores and drive a lot of foot traffic in, say, the first 2-3 months, you can have amazing sales. But it's a infinite game. You want to keep your product on shelf as long as possible. Retailers aren't built around drops like sneakers. You don't just drop a product in Walmart and then it sells out and then you move on. You have to sell that product every week ad infinitum. And so there's a danger with becoming reliant on the creator and driving that hype. And maybe it can last 1 year, 2 year, 3 years, but how does that play out over 5, 10, 20, 30, 40 years? The other thing is I think there's a danger of rushing in and rushing product development and putting the wrong product on shelf before you've thought it through, before you've thought through the pricing, got user feedback. You may get lucky with that. You may hit a home run out the gate, but there's many chances that you can rush the product development phase. There's many reasons why lots of successful brands have started in 5 stores, then gone to 10, then gone to 20, then gone to 50. So with D2C, we're able to test and learn and get direct feedback every day, tweak the products, improve the branding proposition. And the third thing I'd say is we're trying to build a brand that can transcend the creator. We're trying to build a brand with the visuals and with the whole tone of voice and the marketing that if you don't know who Jacksepticeye is and you've never followed his content, you still want to pick it up and buy it, and it still delivers when you're at home. And so from my point of view, yes, we could probably move even faster, but I'm trying to build a brand that can be around for 50 to 100 years. And that's how I'm looking at it.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. Also, were you involved in the marketing branding side and the design of the brand? Because because
Yeah, we
it
decided to
does
do that when I joined, yeah.
because I'll be honest, and I mean this in the best way possible. It looks similar to I think Ugly.
Well, that's it. Sean and I
In
have very. This is why when we met, there was a big alignment for me, and I think alignment's so important in
cool.
things in life.
Yeah.
He was saying we're similar age. He lives in the UK as well, so we're able, and I'm back in the UK at the moment, so we've been able to spend time in person together. And I've grown up, watching YouTube content, being part of that world, and listened to the
Yeah.
things he said. And I said, yeah, this is what I'm thinking. This is how I see things too, which is why I was excited to work with him. And now, as we're developing more video content and creative content, there's big alignment there between us. And then the teams I'm bringing on board to help us do it too. It's all about alignment on having that same approach. So yeah, that was a big part of it.
No, that's cool. That's cool because I remember like opening the box and being like, "Wow, this is like." First of all, it's super cool, like kind of bright colors and just really fun and engaging. I really genuinely like love the logo, And I remember like showing like a couple friends too. And because I also was sharing them Ugly, and they they're fans of consumer VC and all that jazz. And they're like, this looks like actually branding wise like quite similar to Ugly. I'm like, I know, like it's great, it's awesome.
Well, yeah, there's myself and there's some other designers and people like that who touch both projects.
Cool.
But there's some themes threading through in terms of bright colors, big logos, fun,
Mhm.
soulful brands with character. Um,
Yes.
and obviously, a lot of it has came out of Sean's brain in the first few meetings between us and the branding team, about the cup of sunshine and starting your day optimistically with that cup of sunshine. It all came from Sean, alongside obviously him he starts every video he's ever done with top of the morning, saying top of the morning. So
That's
it's very
awesome.
authentic
That's
in that
awesome.
sense. Yeah.
How many products do you have right now? And how do you also think about like ideating like new SKUs like specifically?
Yeah, so again, a lot of learnings from Ugly on that sense. To answer the second part first, but we were listening to the community. We're doing surveys. We're asking people. We're running ideas past the community, and there will be limited edition drops coming, of lots of new things ongoing. So there's a huge pipeline of products. Wanted to keep it relatively simple at the beginning, so we have 4 coffees, 4 teas, 2 hot chocolates, and then a range of clothing and merch and drinkware. But that's just the beginning. We have all sorts of things coming. Convenience is a big factor in what we're trying to bring to the market this year. Certainly exploring some new products, some different formats of coffee as well. If you think about the different ways people drink coffee beyond just coffee beans. No, not looking at ready to drink for now, but really just listening and exploring what works. And because the business is kind of independent right now and doesn't have any outside investment, we're able to make these decisions at the right pace. And we're not trying to hit crazy growth targets for the sake of trying to hit crazy growth targets right now.
Yeah, so you're kind of in like the learning phase in terms of what actually is working and resonating, and just seeing and just hearing feedback.
Yeah, and building a really solid foundation, like really well-run business with good customer service, good operations, fast shipping, well-run website, branding that resonates, and then building a content cycle and flywheel where we're able to constantly create content with and without Sean. Um, You'll see the characters in the brand being brought to life over the next few weeks as well. And I think for us, getting those basics in place, it's almost like building a bonfire, and we see an injection of capital as putting gasoline on that bonfire. And I think a lot of brands, and maybe Ugly was the same, it's almost like you have the gasoline sat there. And whilst you're trying to build the bonfire and trying to hit the targets, you pour a bit of gas on, and then you're trying to catch up. Whereas going slow hopefully allows us to go faster in future.
How many markets are you currently in?
We ship worldwide, so I think it's about
Worldwide. Okay.
170 markets we've shipped to so far.
Wow, that's really impressive.
He's got a lot of fans. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. Wow, my word, that's just incredible. How how then, like, in terms of how you actually think about, I know we talked a little bit about the sourcing side and like the little bit about the manufacturing process. How do you then approach fulfillment in terms of and actually fulfilling those orders? Because that must be quite extensive in terms of be able to having to fulfill all those orders to 70 countries, and they're all of course single box.
Yeah, exactly. So we've centralized everything for now, and so we are using different partners to ship things where they need to go to. We are carbon neutral on the shipping front, but as we expand, we will look at strategic 3PL and roasting partners in different markets. But right now we're shipping things as quickly as we possibly can, and the service level's pretty high. So I think depending where you are in the world, even we posted today about shipping to Australia. People should be receiving their packages within a week. So we're trying to stay as close to roast date as possible. Obviously, as we're small and we're expanding and we're growing, we're trying to scale those operations. But I think for us, we can look very clearly at the data with D2C, see where the consumers are, see where Sean's audience is, and then map out a roadmap to expanding that roastery and third-party logistics providers. Yeah, so we've already explored European expansion for that side of things, but it's one step at a time, and complexity kills startups too. So really trying to keep things simple, keep things lean, and kind of keeping the most important thing, almost like ruthlessly at the moment.
Yeah, on that kind of topic, I remember when we began this conversation and you talked about how during your time at Ugly, especially the past few years, a lot changed. Obviously, global pandemic, we had the supply chain crunch, we also had Brexit. And I'm wondering what specifically, when you think about top of the morning or just, entrepreneurship in general, and you're trying to expand internationally, especially being, a European based brand as you are, how has Brexit specifically impacted your decisions when it comes to operations?
Yeah, well, Top of the Morning is a US company with a US roasting.
Oh, it is. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. Okay.
But,
Oh, okay.
but if you were, then it does change things significantly. It makes things a lot trickier for UK brands to expand into Europe. So I think if you were thinking globally, you'd certainly be looking at somewhere like Amsterdam or Dublin as a head office.
Got it. So you'd have to have multiple kind of head offices.
And many UK companies have had to set up European head offices now as well,
Wow.
to be able to kind of leapfrog those things. So instead of exporting to Europe, you're now importing from the UK and then selling it on, which is
Got it.
kind of crazy that we've been put in that situation. But that's the reality of losing access to the free market.
No, that makes a ton of sense. I'd imagine, since you're right now learning, maybe this question doesn't apply, but have you also had any issues with dead stock or maybe inventory that you're unable to sell?
Not so far, but it's definitely something we're conscious of, and which is why, in some ways we are almost happier creating hype and selling through items and being out of stock for a week or so versus having lots of dead stock. I think on Ugly, we certainly came across it a few times, although, like I said, we usually were pretty good at selling through. But yeah, shelf life on that product was good, which helped. I think it's certainly an issue if you have short shelf life. But so far, not a massive issue.
Not a massive issue. And so I'd imagine, in terms of how you replenish it, are you doing kind of small quantities at high frequencies, or is it more so large quantities at lower frequencies?
Yeah, so we generally buy the bags and the pouches and the at large volumes, and then we will fill them in batches. So we will roast the coffee. Say just rough math. Say we make 10,000 bags, we'll maybe roast 1,000 in a week, so that the coffee arrives fresh to the consumer. The roaster will roast more often. So there's always bags on hand to fill, and we have coffee on hand always. Through the partners we work with. So it's a case of, and it's the same with the other products too, tea, hot chocolate, and then obviously the merch. If a merch item sells out, people add themselves to the notify me when it's available list, and then we'll get another drop in of t-shirts or mugs or, and quite often those items are limited edition too, which hopefully creates the idea of like a lot of these things are one-offs, and so if you buy them, you're getting something special.
No, got it. That makes sense. And in terms of like the entire, on the supply chain side, this is all like your partners, like co-manufacturing, that are doing the roasting and that sort of thing, right?
Yeah, we've again, we're trying to be really clever and lean with the way we do this. Right now, I'm the only kind of full-time employee at the company. Most other partners are third-party or outsourced. The whole organization's remote. We have myself and Sean obviously in the UK, and then the roastery in the US. 3PL in the US, web team UK, branding team UK, social media team UK and global distribution, other team members in the US, finance in the US. So yeah, it's a remotely distributed organization that's super lean and designed for flexibility, and like with all the lessons that I've got behind me. So I'm applying all of those things that made Ugly challenging to this business model. And again, still learning new things. It's a new category. It's a new period in life. Working with the creators, a new experience. So yeah, that's kind of how we're treating it right now.
No, that makes a ton of sense. That's amazing how kind of globally distributed you are.
Yeah,
With
it's
with
crazy.
the
The
company.
time zones, I have like multiple time zones on my Google Calendar, and it does mean it's relatively 24/7, but it's also it's a way of working that would never have happened without coronavirus, which is obviously a very bad thing that happened to everybody, but also allowed us all to have this flexible working style where, we're connected via the internet all the time, and visually you wouldn't know where the content's made or where anyone's based.
Got it.
So yeah, I'm having lived in America and run a brand in America. I'm now able to run a US brand where I'm in London right now, but wherever, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, that is super cool. That is super cool. So my final question for you, Hugh, what would you value more? $100 of inventory, so $100 of your COGS of how much you spent on COGS, or $100 cash on your balance sheet?
Oh, that's a good question. Probably cash. If I had, yeah, and then again, it depends what situation you're in, obviously.
Well,
But certainly if
I
you're,
feel like if you're
if you're
selling product, if you're able to sell the product, right? And if like let's say your margins are, 50%, then that inventory is then $100 of inventory is worth $200 since you just sold it, right?
yeah, it depends. Yeah, it really depends on the situation you're in. So that's why I took a second to think about
Yeah,
it.
totally.
Again, you don't have any flexibility if your cash is tied up in stock. So obviously, if it's selling, great. If it's
But
not
if you
selling,
but if you have dead stock, then not so good.
if it's sat in a warehouse, then it's cash tied up, and you cannot pivot, you cannot flex, you can't. And there's nothing wrong with having constraints of very little cash to try and get marketing, but it's definitely challenging to. So yeah, it's double-edged sword. It's a really tricky question to answer. Having been in been in both situations where, again, if your product's selling really quickly, right now on top of the morning, I don't think it would be a big issue for us to be in that situation. But certainly on other brands, and projects I've worked on, you probably don't want all your money tied up in stock. If for us, when we're D2C only, if you're capturing pre-orders, then I think you can stimulate more demand than you have supply. It's not like we're going to short a retailer right now. I think if you start talking about retailers then it
Yeah.
does change the context. So yeah, context is everything, and I think it's a really good question.
As you say, it really depends on the company. It seems like right now, in terms of top of the morning, since you're selling out and constantly, it seems like $100 of inventory of top of morning coffee is more valuable, and you'd rather value that more than $100 cash. But of course, it really depends on the situation.
Yeah, and totally. And with the creator brand, you can order too much stock or too little stock. If we're going to post a YouTube video, we can either order too much in or not enough. It's very hard to forecast on the success of Sean's content. So it's something that does come up quite often where you're trying to forecast how many bags of coffee we're going to sell through this YouTube video. And we've got enough data now to make assumptions, but TikTok, YouTube don't really work in linear ways. They don't really, map out what happened before might not happen twice in a row. So it does make that challenging, which is a different scenario in terms of marketing. And obviously, if you overorder, then you have that challenge, right, of having that stock in a warehouse.
Yeah, that's why I think that e-commerce can be more tricky, I'd imagine, on the for the inventory planning perspective than, for example, like a retailer, where it seems like I mean, harder in different ways. The retailer maybe wants to order more. Or order more, and so you get the restock pretty quickly if that's the case, which is a good case to have. But there's a bit more of a cycle there. Whereas in e-commerce, you could have one video that maybe does really well, and great, maybe you're out of stock, and then you have one video that you thought would do well, in terms of maybe a promotion or what have you, and not just talking about if it's a talent led brand, if you even have like a influencer a campaign, or even like a Facebook campaign, whatever it is, sometimes it might not perform well, and then you might be sitting on dead stock.
Well, this is everything's hard, really. Um, That would be my but all the channels are challenging. They all have their unique challenges. Every business model, working without a creator is hard. Working with a creator has challenges in terms of forecasting, making content. So there's no silver bullet. You have to have a product that people want and a brand that resonates, and really think through your unit economics, and then be disciplined.
Hugh, thank you so much for your time. This was so much fun chatting with you, man.
No, I hope it was helpful. If anybody wants to learn about my challenges, then know where to find me. And if I can ever help with anybody with anything, certainly the gory stuff, I'm always happy to lend an ear and be there to listen and help if I can with the tough experiences we've had as well as good ones.
Really appreciate your time, Hugh. That's as always. You were one of the first people I met when I started my other podcast, and like just really appreciate your friendship. Even if it's a virtual friendship, one day I'll make it an in-person one. For now,
yeah, for now.
Exactly.
Feelings mutual, mate. Oh, of course.
And there you have it. It was such a pleasure chatting with you. Hugh, thanks again so much for coming on the podcast. Again, thanks so much for listening, folks. This is brought to you by Manufactured. Manufactured is an online platform that helps brands manufacture, finance, and distribute inventory across 20 industries and 25 countries. If you're interested in learning more, check out manufactured.com. Hopefully this was helpful to you and your business.